Hey, how you doing? Welcome back. Daniel Ruiz Tizon is available. Episode 217, the Patreon segment of the show. Left-handed, tall glass, stirring. That was my dad's signature sound. I grew up hearing that sound. I took on that sound. I took it into the new century. I'd taken it into this new decade. Left-handed, convey that air of intrigue. Thought I could hear a siren there in the background. It's 20 years, almost 20 years in the next few weeks since I lost my mum. And my dad was a couple of years after that. And it's strange that I was never... I think obviously my mum's loss overshadowed my dad's loss. And the loss of my dad was just complicated by the strange manner of his passing, the disappearance, the searching for him when I finally got my act together and started taking posters around to hospitals. Posters that were poorly printed, by the way, which may have delayed the eventual identification when a body was found. It reminds me of the Star Wars vintage action figures. There was the bizarre choice around the time of the first Star Wars film they just produced 12 figures, or 11 figures, I forget which, and they did not include the Peter Cushing figure, Grand Moff Tarkin. It's a very strange decision. It took about 20 years before they produced one. They've since produced several versions, and given that his role was as big as Alec Guinness's role in that film, they were the two great stars of that film, it is a very strange decision, particularly as in his place, they issued the figure that was originally called the Death Squad Commander, a name that was later changed to Death Star Commander. It was a guy in grey uniform and a weird black hat, and the name was changed, obviously, because it kind of, Death Squad Commander had sort of Nazi connotations. But it was strange that they chose to make that figure arguably the dullest vintage action figure. That's how it's regarded in the Star Wars action figure community, rather than Moff Tarkin. And in a way, I feel like my dad's loss, in a way, it was a bit of a Moff Tarkin situation. It was like he's a massive figure in my life, and yet I seem to have overlooked his passing slightly in comparison to my mum. There was none of that intense grieving, maybe because I was I was just done with the grieving. I was exhausted with the grieving. But for me, it was a strange enough situation, the way I lost my mum abruptly and finding her. And then this thing with my dad disappearing, to go from just being an ordinary person, having a very ordinary life, to having these two tragedies back to back. Certainly my mum had overshadowed my dad. He became the Moff Tarkin, as I say, just completely overlooked. I wonder how it would have worked if it had been the other way round. My dad supported me hugely when my mum passed away, and in my OCD ridden prayers that I say every night around 1700 hours, I always thank him for that. I have that moment where I remember him and I thank him for his help in those 2.5 years, beginning with arriving at the family bedsit. Not a long journey for him, considering he just lived downstairs, to block up a hole that a mouse had disappeared into a couple of days after my mum's funeral. That was going to be too much for me to deal with. I can't do rodents at the best of times, but that was not the time for the rodent to be making their appearance. Yeah, I wonder if I'd lost my mum after my dad, how much of a support my mum would have been. I think it would have been more difficult for her, given that she was on the wrong end of the divorce and given the way that my dad had treated her. I don't think she would have, and that's not a criticism, I don't think she would have provided that level of support. And obviously I think that my dad, knowing I was a mollycoddled Spanish kid, knew that, and he'd said it the following morning, the morning after my mum passed away, he had said, you're gonna feel this more than your sister, because she was far more independent. So I think he had to sort of step in, and he probably deserved more than the Moff Tarkin status I accorded him, but I don't know whether that was me just protecting myself. I don't know. Anyway, look...